From our lecture this week, we know that ecology is organized into somewhat of a hierarchy of different subfields of ecology as a whole, because it encompasses so many different areas, from the individual through biomes and through to the biosphere. So one of the parts of the assignment this week, and what we're focusing on lecture, is the hierarchy to ecological studies, or ecological studies. And so 5 major levels that will be focused on throughout the term are the individual level, the population level, the community level, ecosystem, and landscape. And so this is going to give you another example of how we can look at all of these different levels that encompass ecological research. So this first picture shows you a single individual of a plant species called sea oats, or its scientific name is Uniola paniculata, and it grows on sand dunes on barrier islands along the Atlantic Ocean. And its distribution is roughly from Maryland south along the coast. So these pictures all originate from barrier islands in Georgia. And so what we have here is a single individual. It has a basal group of leaves at the base of this plant down here, and then a long stalk and the seeds up here at the top. And so an example of a question that we might ask about this species as it relates to its ecology and the ecosystem is, what adaptations allow seagrass to grow on sand dunes along the Atlantic Ocean? So we're looking at things that are specific to the individual, not how it relates to its population or its community, but what specific individual traits might a plant have to survive or reproduce within its environment. So now if we look at the population level, so here in this picture we can see how sea oats grow right along these dunes that border up right against the beach and the shore against the Atlantic Ocean here. So in this population of sea oats, we might ask, how are population dynamics changing with storm and dune erosion cycles? So with the tides fluctuating, this picture was taken between high and low tide, but at high tide, the water is coming up right against the dune here, which causes extensive erosion. And if I pull up another picture here, we can see how a storm has eroded the leading dune here to the point where these individuals, their root system here is exposed, and the leading edge of the dune has been completely eroded away. So the effects of storms can have significant changes on these leading foredunes. The foredunes are the ones that are closest to the ocean. So it can have a significant impact on plant survival, much less growth and reproduction. So if a storm comes through and knocks the dune down, it's going to wash away individuals of this sea oat, and so it'll completely change possibly whether or not that population even exists. So now I'm looking at the next level, which is the community level. We have our population of sea oats right here, and we can see that there are other different plants growing within this dune community. So we have other types of grasses down here, and we've got some shrubs over here. So there are several different populations of plants within this one dune community, and the ocean, for reference, is back over here on the other side of the dune. So we're looking at several different populations within this one community, and there are populations of different species here, and that's what's important to know about a community, is we're looking at populations of different species interacting within a single environment. And so having built from the individual to the population level to here at the community level, we might ask if this population of seagrass is competing with populations of these other species around here for different dune resources. So we might ask, well, dunes are composed of sand, and sand leaches water and nutrients very quickly, meaning that the water and nutrients flows out of the sand quickly. There isn't enough substrate for those nutrients to stay within the soil. So does that mean that these populations are competing very strongly for those limited resources? And how does that affect then the populations and the health of the various species? So that's level of a community question that we might ask. And from here, we can build up to the ecosystem level. So here we might say, looking at the entire ecosystem, we have our foredune over here, which is right up against the ocean. And then all of this area back here is the back dune. And the back dunes are generally more stable, and they don't fluctuate as much as far as height of the dune and position of the sand, because it's farther away from the strongest effects right along the ocean. So here we can look at different sort of communities. So our foredune community is going to have different sort of environmental effects, like the changing of the sand. So you might get burial or uncovering as the sand fluctuates, as opposed to the back dune community, which has a more stable environment. So here we might ask, how do annual variations in weather, such as wind or storms or changes in precipitation, rainfall, affect the stability, so accounting here for the changing of the foredune, and the productivity of the dune and barrier island ecosystem? So here we have the foredune, as I already mentioned, is kind of one community. The back dune is another community, and these different communities are going to see different sort of environmental effects. So in asking how these annual variations in weather throughout a year in different seasons, you're going to get different kinds of storms and strengths of storms. So in the summer, you're going to get the tropical storms and hurricanes, which can have much greater effects of erosion, and depending on storm surge, how far inland that water might move. So we can look at these ecosystem level effects and looking at how the environment and climate can have an effect on these communities here within the dune ecosystem. And then finally, if we look at the landscape level, so in looking at the landscape level here, if we look at this image from Google Earth of Sapelo Island, out here we have the Atlantic Ocean. Right here is our foredune. This is our back dune. And then we have other ecosystems within this part of the island that borders the ocean itself. So here we have marsh. Back here we have forest. So you have different ecosystems that are interacting at this landscape level. And these different ecosystems are going to have their own environmental effects and even microclimates. So in the forest, you're going to see at the understory, the shading of the pine trees within the forest is going to create less light for the understory plants, and thus there's going to be a microclimate there. The marsh is going to be more wet, obviously, since it's a marsh, but there's the effects of the salt water from the ocean, so you're going to see different plants in that area than you would in a freshwater marsh. And then you're going to have the dune plants, which is yet another ecosystem within just this section of the island. And so on this landscape level, considering all these different ecosystems, we can look at why are organisms distributed in that manner. So a question we might ask is, how do changes in soil nutrient composition and water availability affect species distribution in various ecosystems on a barrier island from a gradient from the ocean inland? So here we're accounting for the stability of the soil, access to water, and access to nutrients that's going to allow larger organisms like trees or different species of plants and animals in all these different communities to grow and survive and reproduce. So the landscape is this highest higher level of organization that looks at all of these different ecosystems within one area. So now, to just reiterate, we started at the individual level and looked specifically at what adaptations of this plant, sea oats, allow it to grow on sand dunes along the Atlantic Ocean. From there, we built up to the population level, and we considered how population dynamics change with storm and dune erosion cycles. And there, we built up and looked at how this population of sea oats fits into a community as a whole. And we asked, is this population of sea oats competing with populations of other species for dune resources? And then going to the next level, we considered how this community fits into an ecosystem composed of more communities. And we asked how annual variations in weather, such as wind and storms and rainfall, affect the stability and productivity of the dune ecosystem. And then finally, we considered how the dune ecosystem fits with other ecosystems on the barrier islands along the Atlantic Ocean. And we asked how changes in soil nutrient composition and water availability affect species distribution in various ecosystems on a barrier island from a gradient from the ocean inland. And so we can look at how all of these different organisms and populations and communities are all structured together and how they interact with the environment for distribution and growth and survival and reproduction. And that is the fundamental hierarchy of ecology, and something that is great about this field of biology because it really can take very specific things but look at them on the big picture and a larger scale.